2 investigations from the case files of Lieutenant Joe Kenda. First, a pair of young men make a horrific discovery.
She had burns over 90% of her body.
The last words she said was cherry point, and she never spoke again.
What could possibly motivate somebody to do such a violent, painful act?
This has to be one of the most dangerous people in the state of Colorado.
Then, a college student takes his last breath.
Wake up, Tim!
There were no visible injuries. So why did this person die?
When Kenda uncovers the truth, it's more shocking than he ever imagined.
Apparently he's blind.
Well, this is a very new one to me. Certain crime scenes come across as so strange you don't forget them. You expect to see certain things, but 5% of the time you don't. And it really strikes you when you're well experienced.
Summer evening in Colorado Springs.
There he is, brother.
And Eric Ships and Michael Rossell are heading out for a night of fun.
How was work?
They're making me work on Saturday.
What?
Yeah.
Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Mike had gotten off work, and we just kind of said, let's go do something. Just get in the car and go for a ride.
Yeah. Turn it up.
It was summertime. In those days, we spent a lot of time driving around town.
Hey, is that a... What is that?
I just happened to see a flash on my left-hand side,
What is that?
which shouldn't have been there.
We thought, shoot, we should pull over and see if we can put that out.
Colorado Springs is surrounded by forests and grasslands, so fire is taken very seriously. It can easily get out of hand.
As soon as we approached, everything changed.
We realized this was a person.
She turned and looked at us.
I can still visualize 34 years later, her looking at me and seeing the whites of her eyes.
So you don't have anything else to tell me? All right, see what you have to say after a night in jail. Get him out of here.
We were doing an interrogation of an individual when this call came in.
Hey, Lieutenant.
Hey, what's the rush? Fire department's asking for help. They got a body up off East Fountain Street. All right, let me know if you need anything from me. We'll do.
When the fire department asked for the police to respond, that's unusual. So everybody sort of paid attention to that. Why do they want us?
At the scene, detectives John Anderson and Brian Ritz quickly learn why their presence is required.
How you doing, Captain?
Hey, how you doing? It was a small fire. In the center of it was a woman with burns all over her body.
Quickly put out the fire before they got there.
Is she likely going to survive?
It's not really looking promising.
The burn injuries with this victim was significant. She was burned over 90% of her body.
The boys that found her, did they recognize her? Do they know her?
No, and we've not been able to find an ID on her.
Aside from the have no way to identify her.
It's a big puzzle. There's just not a lot to go on.
The reason why I called you out is just before she had lost consciousness when they were putting the fire out, she had mentioned something about being attacked.
She said she was attacked.
Yes.
It would be an enormously heinous crime if someone were to attack someone and then intentionally set them on fire.
Can you show me exactly where the body was?
About 20 yards that direction.
Thank you.
As Anderson and Ritz make their way to the burn site, a sickening odor fills the air.
There is a smell. I can't even describe it to you. It's beyond horrible. And that smell is the burning of human flesh.
Well, the captain was right about the small burn area.
Yeah.
The detectives notice with interest that the burn area is very confined. There should be a much wider burn area than there is.
Hey, John, what do you make of this?
Very close to this burn area is a 1-gallon gasoline can and a Bic lighter. Close to the gasoline can, there's a pair of ladies' shoes, and there is a woman's coat that has been neatly folded and placed next to the shoes. Very, very odd.
Could have been left by the attacker. Could have been a third party that just ran away.
See if the boys are ready to talk, and maybe they can clear some of this up.
It's a good idea.
We had very sketchy information, so it becomes very important to talk to the reporting party who were first there to ask if any evidence was moved, if they saw anyone leaving the scene.
Hey, guys.
Boys, we know you saw something really terrible tonight, but we need to find out what you know. When you found the woman, was there anyone else in the area?
No, it was just her. We did all we could until the firemen got out here.
Put the fire out, and then sat down next to the body.
It'll be okay.
And just hold on, help is coming.
She was conscious and making some noises or trying to speak.
Do either of you remember specifically what she said?
She didn't say much. She just kind of mumbled something about a man who stabbed her.
He did this.
What?
I was stabbed. He did this to me.
At this point, this case is being looked at as a first-degree assault. If she dies, it becomes a homicide.
But who could be capable of such a heinous crime?
This is a very vindictive and dangerous individual.
Hey, you guys did a great job tonight. You may have saved this woman's life. Try to go home and get some rest.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Despite the young men's help, detectives are faced with a number of unanswered questions.
So when we go to the hospital,
what's her blood pressure?
She's 88/48.
Get these fluids opened up.
the victim is being treated by the emergency room and the burn unit. It's not unusual for a detective to be able to get in there and see if she says anything.
Can you tell me your name?
She had inhaled the flames into her throat and her lungs, so she can only speak in shallow gasps.
Debbie. Bridgewood.
Debbie Bridgewood.
At least we have a name to go off of now, and we may be able to trace back to a residence or a boyfriend or friends.
Get the tracheotomy kit over here, please.
With burns, our main concern right up at the outset is the lungs. If the person is in a state where they can't breathe on their own, the machine has to provide that for them.
So the possibility of talking is going to stop when they do that.
If you guys have any questions to ask, you're going to need to get in here and do that right away.
I remember him looking at me, and he said, the last words that she is going to say in this life is the answer she's going to give you to the next question you ask.
Debbie, I'm Detective Anderson. I need to ask you a question. What happened to you?
I had to get very close to her to try to make sure that I could hear her response.
The only thing they can make sense out of is the two words, Cherry Point. And that's the last thing she says to them.
Cherry Point?
No idea.
Cherry Point could mean nothing, could mean everything. We don't know how significant it is, but it's the only clue we have. So here we have this highly unusual case. Debbie Bridgewood has been doused in gasoline and set on fire. She's been intubated. The conversation with her is over.
However, Debbie's last words to detectives have given them a possible clue.
Cherry Point. And she didn't say anything else? Nope. Ritz and I are stumped on what it could mean.
It meant nothing to me. I didn't know if that was a neighborhood, if it was a city in the Denver metro area. We're coming up empty.
It could be anywhere. It could be subdivision. Might not even be in Colorado Springs.
Detectives check the city directories and the street maps. There's no Cherry Point Avenue, Street, Lane in the city of Colorado Springs. Nothing.
At a dead end, detectives opt for a different strategy.
We thought maybe she's a runaway, or maybe she was expected to be somewhere and didn't show up. So we want to check to see if there's any kind of missing persons report for an individual that matches this description.
Hey, take a look at this. See this one here?
Well, it seems to match your description.
They find a missing persons report reported 24 hours before the fire of a Laura Smalls. She's 27 years old with long brown hair. She matches the physical, except for the name.
I think we need to talk to Laura Small's family.
I think you're right. I'll give him a call.
All right, good luck, guys.
We are hopeful that this case involving Laura Smalls is meaningful. Maybe Debbie Bridgewood is an alias. Who knows? But the possibility is that she is, in fact, Laura Smalls.
As detectives wait for Laura Small's family, the hospital calls with an important update on the victim.
Anderson. All right. Thanks for letting us know. How's the hospital? Our burn victim just passed away.
Oh, damn.
She has died in Penrose main burn unit after 11 hours of excruciating suffering. Now, the next step in this investigation is to determine the damage and what the coroner's opinion is of the result.
While the victim's body is transported to the morgue, the Smalls family arrives at the station.
Ladies, have a seat.
Typically, people are very emotional when you summon them as a result of a missing persons report they had filed. They suffer from two things: hope that they found them alive and fear that they didn't.
Did you find her?
Well, to be honest, we're not sure. That's why we asked you to come down to the station today. Does the name Debbie Bridgewood mean anything to you?
No.
Did Laura live with you?
Yes.
And that's here in town?
Yes. But we haven't lived here very long. We recently moved here from Cherry Point, North Carolina.
They look at each other, and without saying a word, they're able to communicate that this is going to be her. This is Laura Smalls.
It's a revelation to us, but we have the name of Debbie Bridgewood. We need to make sure that we're talking about the same person.
I'm going to show you a photo. Right now, we think this could be Laura, but I need to caution you ahead of time. She's been in a very serious accident. It's not easy to look at.
You can see the anticipation in their face. They know what's coming. Something they don't want to see, but something they must see.
We're very sorry.
Oh, my God!
They look at it, and without any question, that is, in fact, her daughter and her sister, Laura Smalls.
It's the worst news you could get, so it becomes very emotional for the officer as well as the victim's family.
We found some possessions at the scene that we believe may belong to Laura. Let us know.
After we allow them a few moments to compose themselves, the detectives ask these women, what are the circumstances of the report? Mom says that Laura had been living with her and her sister. She did not come home the night before last.
She just recently moved back in with us. She's been having some sort of issues with her husband.
Laura and her estranged husband were separated, and the sister talked about how there'd been allegations of potential abuse within the marriage.
What kind of abuse?
We're not really sure. Laura didn't really get into details.
Laura's sister explains that Laura had been very distant lately, but as her family, they wanted to give her some space to sort things out.
If we're looking at a domestic violence situation, this could be motive for what has happened to our victim.
Do you know where we can find Laura's husband?
Yes. His name is Dan. and he's in the military.
With Laura's husband now a person of interest, detectives Ritz and Anderson reach out to authorities at nearby Fort Carson.
Even though Dan Smalls is not stationed at Fort Carson, they have access to the records of the United States Army. And they were able to locate Dan Smalls and provide him for interview.
Have a seat. We need to ask you a few questions about your wife, Laura.
All right, what do you need to know?
Why don't you start just by telling us a little about your relationship?
It's been better, you know.
Dan tells us very simply he has had domestic issues with his wife. They were separated, but that he was deployed outside of Colorado Springs and was actively on duty at the base. It was easy to be verified through military records. Dan has a solid alibi.
So what's going on? Why all the questions?
I hate to be the one to inform you, but unfortunately, Laura has died.
What?
It must have been so hard for her husband. Throw in the hideous way in which she died. What a torturous way to leave somebody.
We now have to start backtracking to see if we can find a suspect in this case.
In need of a new lead, detectives return to the crime scene.
In many cases, we go back to the scene and see if there's something different there in different light.
Get the gas can and lighter right over here.
We want to re-examine the scene to see if we can get some other clues that might lead us in a different direction.
So there's no evidence of the killer coming in or going out by car. So they must have walked.
Right. And if they walked, they probably got their gas somewhere nearby.
Exactly.
Closest station's probably, what is it, Shelton and Fountain?
So that's our next step. Let's go see if they might be able to tell us anything.
Hey man, how's it going?
Good.
Is that all for you?
Yeah.
Have a good one. Appreciate it.
Hey, John.
There is a display rack containing red 1-gallon gas cans with a yellow diagonal stripe that said gasoline. The very same can that they saw at that crime scene.
Hey there. How's it going?
We're with CSPD. Need to ask you a few questions.
When they see that can, they know somebody bought that can in this store. And who might that be? Detectives are working on a strange case involving a woman now identified as Laura Smalls, who was set on fire by an unknown attacker.
We're with CSPD. Need to ask you a few questions.
How can I help you?
Would you happen to know if anyone's bought one of the gas cans in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, actually, I worked the graveyard shift last night and I sold one.
What did the customer look like?
Maybe in her 30s, long brown hair.
He'd be able to provide a description of this individual which matches the description of Laura Smalls.
There's no doubt. Laura Smalls bought the instruments of her death.
All I remember is that she was acting really weird.
How so?
Tell him you want that a gallon of gas.
I'm sorry?
Don't forget the lighter.
You want a lighter? Here. And then she just left.
Do you think she was drunk, high on something?
No, man. We get a lot of weirdos and drunks here on the graveyard shift, but I never seen nobody like her.
All right, thank you.
Why would a victim purchase gasoline and a Bic lighter? It's really bizarre.
The next step in this investigation is to attend the autopsy to determine what the coroner's opinion is of the result.
Hey, Doc.
We were told she suffered third-degree burns.
Yes, but what's interesting is where she wasn't burned.
Notice that there's no burns underneath her body.
Cases where you have parts of their body that are unburned and give you clues as to what their action was at the time.
She made no attempt to move when she was on fire. She made no attempt to escape or to crawl away from her attacker if there was one.
Doc, reportedly, she said that she had been stabbed.
No, there's nothing on this body that would indicate anything like that happened.
Laura Small's death was officially ruled a suicide by the El Paso County coroner, and the investigation was closed.
Here's your report.
Thank you.
It's a suicide of the worst possible kind, self-immolation, setting oneself on fire.
I can't believe it. Why?
The evidence all fits. She did this to herself.
What we'll never know is why. What could possibly motivate somebody to do such a violent, painful act upon themselves?
With the case closed, detectives will never know precisely why Laura Smalls took her own life. However, one possible explanation may lie in the form of a complex psychological condition thought to be triggered by severe trauma.
From a psychological point of view, she may have suffered from what is called a dissociative personality, more commonly known as a multiple personality disorder.
If Laura Smalls did suffer from multiple personality disorder, it would explain why she originally identified herself as Debbie Bridgewood.
Debbie didn't remember her body being set on fire and suffering great pain, but only remembered the assault of a man.
The multiple personality theory also suggests that a third personality, one that was decidedly male and decidedly violent, was responsible for Laura's brutal death.
Why are you doing this to me? Why can't you just leave me alone? This is what you deserve.
A person who suffers dissociative identity disorder experiences a totally different personality emerging from them.
The night of July 6, 1984, Laura Smalls devised a plan to end her days on this planet. She methodically went through the plan, purchased a gasoline container, filled it with a gallon of gasoline, purchased a lighter.
Laura Smalls was apparently overwhelmed by emotional pain.
I don't want to do this, but you're making me do this.
It's quite possible she couldn't take her life herself, and the disorder she suffered helped her find a way out when she allowed this alternate personality to emerge and do that for her.
Please don't do this, please.
Shut
up! Please, I don't want to die.
Laura Smalls became someone else.
Shut up!
She became an angry man.
Take off your jacket. No. Take off your jacket!
She created this man who brought her to her death to rid her of all this misery.
You did this to yourself.
She took off her coat.
You did this to yourself.
She took off her shoes.
No. You made me do this. Please, that's it. Please.
While no one will ever fully understand what role mental illness played in Laura Smalls' death, those who witnessed her suicide firsthand will never forget it.
I still think about what a horrific death that must have been. It really still hits a nerve with me that somebody would feel so terrible that they would actually do that to themselves.
The incidence of suicide attempts and successful suicides is upward of 70% with people suffering from dissociative identity disorder.
No one could understand what pain Laura Smalls was suffering from. And that could be true for any number of reasons. Something awful was going on in Laura Small's brain, and she drew it to the worst possible conclusion.
Coming up, a mysterious death leads Kenda to a revelation no one saw coming.
A moment in time becomes a moment of madness. And he starts to panic. Have I gone too far?
Officer Huddleston is cruising along in the wee hours of the morning in Colorado Springs. He's going nuts because he's having to stop at light after light after light.
Oh, come on, really? Every red light?
Car 31, please respond to the 200 block of South Prospect Avenue. Reports of an unconscious male needing assistance.
31-10-4 en route.
I think he was relieved to have something to do. He can turn his license sirens on and go.
Car 31, 1097 on scene.
Because this call was an unconscious male, the situation is unknown.
Police!
Wake up, Tim! Tim, talk to me! Tim!
All right, back up, move. Give me space, move. Hey! 31, tell EMS to step it up. I'm starting CPR on one.
Guy appears to still be alive, but he starts doing CPR.
Wake up, Tim!
He was not having a lot of luck reviving. EMT arrived on the scene, loaded him into the ambulance.
2, 3.
Then headed toward the hospital.
With the victim en route to the ER, officers attempt to speak with the eyewitnesses. When they refuse to offer up any additional information, Lieutenant Joe Kenda is summoned to the scene.
Hey, Lieutenant.
Hey, Huddleston, so what do we got?
We have one male unresponsive when I got here. His ID is Timothy McClure, 27 years of age. Medical took him off. He was pronounced DOA.
What's the cause of death?
Unknown at this point.
There were no visible injuries on the victim. So now we got to figure out, why did this person die? And that's only going to be done by the coroner's office.
So who are these folks here?
Outside this apartment are 4 people sitting on the grass in handcuffs, put there by the patrol officers who responded.
Those are his roommates.
Let me guess, no one's saying anything.
You got it.
All right, let's get him down to the station and see if Rich is available to talk to him. I'll be down as soon as I take a look inside.
Yes, sir.
It's obvious to see there was a struggle in this apartment. Things are out of place, things are thrown about, bottles are broken. There's also a clump of human hair in the floor that's been ripped out of somebody's head. As you move down the hallway, there's 2 holes in the drywall, obviously from human feet. Somebody kicked 2 holes in the wall. This disturbance goes on throughout this apartment. It's not that big, but there's a lot of areas that are knocked over and damaged.
Excuse me, Lieutenant. The coroner's office just called. Want to know if you were coming by the morgue. Apparently the family's been informed of his death, and they're down there to confirm the identity of the body.
Okay, thanks. I'll head out now.
Yes, sir.
Inside the morgue, the examination of Timothy McClure's body has already begun.
Hello, Lieutenant.
How you doing, Doc? It's cold in here.
When a body is deceased, putrefaction or decomposition begins immediately. Morgues, by their nature, are kept at low temperatures to assist in slowing the process before examination can be conducted.
So what do we got? I understand there were no visible injuries on the victim's body?
That's correct.
So you're thinking death by strangulation?
Possibly, but I'm not seeing anything you would expect to find in that case.
The hyoid bone, which is part of the throat structure, is intact. In most cases of strangulation, the hyoid bone is fractured. This is not the case.
It's somewhat odd, but there's hemorrhaging in the whites of his eyes, which is a sign of asphyxia.
Without that fracture in the hyoid bone, he can't say manual strangulation, and he's unwilling to say ligature strangulation. So he says this is most likely homicidal as to manner of death. As to method, I'm not certain.
With more questions than answers, Kenda meets with Timothy's mother, Barbara Marsh.
I know this is very difficult, but can I ask you a few questions? What can you tell me about Timothy? Is there anything you think I should know?
He was really getting his life together. He was such a great son and a great father.
She says he's an enrolled student at Pikes Peak Community College, and he's studying to be a lab technician.
Timothy had been married once before. He was a father of 3. The kids were in another state with his ex-wife, but he cared about his kids.
So we ask, where does Timothy live? She says, Timothy lives with us. He lives with his parents. But he dates this girl named Deborah Lincoln.
That's where they found him, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. How was his relationship with this Deborah?
Good as far as I know.
So you think about the common causes of homicide, money, sex, and revenge, and you think, well, maybe we're looking at a relationship problem here.
Again, I'm very sorry for your loss.
After speaking to Timothy's mother, Kenda seeks out Timothy's girlfriend, Deborah Lincoln.
They just told me Tim died. I was just with him earlier.
Deborah Lincoln is extremely emotionally distraught by the news that Timothy McClure is deceased.
Do you get along with your roommates?
Yes, we all know each other from school. We get along fine.
She said, well, there's a guy, Joe Minnerly, and this girl named Leah Hawkins, and we all kind of live there, and Timothy occasionally stays there with me.
The only problems are caused from the people who don't live there. There's always someone crashing on the couch.
It is that animal house dynamic that you see more often in college situations where you got people coming and going, and so-and-so's friend wants to stay for a week.
This is something that bothers Tim because they're not paying rent.
Was there anyone staying there last night that wasn't a roommate?
There was someone sleeping on the couch when I got home last night.
Deborah says she got home late. She noticed somebody sleeping on the couch. But given the history of this place, she didn't find that to be that unusual.
We are going to need more whiskey.
We always need more whiskey, man.
Timothy McClure is having drinks with roommate Joe.
Hey, who's the dude on the couch?
I don't know, he's one of Leah's friends. I don't even know the guy's name.
Well, I'm going to bed. Coming in soon, Tim?
Yeah, in a few, okay? We're gonna finish the game first.
Okay. Good night.
She said sometime in the middle of the night, Timothy came to bed, and she just knew he was really drunk.
He reeks, and so she's like, would you just get out of here? She thought he was just gonna sleep on the couch in the living room or on the floor or something. And all of a sudden, she's starting to hear a lot of commotion.
Hey, I got early class in the morning.
She was gonna lay down the law and knock it off.
Come on, people.
But it wasn't what she encountered.
Oh my God.
Tim! Tim!
Oh, Tim.
I still don't know what happened. You separated us before we could talk. But I know one of those 3 did this to Tim.
Why don't you sit tight while I sort through all this? Thank you.
So as far as we're concerned, for now, Deborah is truthful.
Hey, Brian, have you spoken to any 3 witnesses yet?
I talked to 2 of them, Joe and Leah, they're the other 2 roommates. Their stories match up, and both of them point the finger at the 3rd witness.
The one you haven't spoken to yet?
Right, he was apparently asleep on the couch. His name is Alonzo Teja.
Yeah, let's go see what Mr. Teja has to say.
So Kenda goes down to the interrogation room where Alonzo's being held. He's looking through the 2-way mirror, but the thing that caught Joe's attention was this guy's eyes. They were white. like completely white.
So what's the deal with his eyes?
Apparently, Mr. Teja is blind.
Blind?
That's right.
So we have a guy who's been accused and identified as a killer, and he is completely blind. Well, this is a very new one to me. I've never dealt with a blind killer before. This ought to be really interesting. We're investigating the death of 27-year-old Timothy McClure. It's rather odd. The method has not been determined. We have witnesses who claim the person responsible is Alonzo Teja. The complication with Alonzo is he's blind. So now we're in the process of discussing this case with Alonzo.
Mr. Teja, you have some explaining to do.
Yeah, I know.
So what were you doing at the apartment? Are you friends with someone that lives there?
Not really. I met Leah yesterday for the first time.
He explains that he met Leah outside a shelter in Colorado Springs that caters to homeless people.
Leah, one of the other roommates, had stayed there for a short time herself, and she had quite a bit of empathy for people staying there.
According to Alonzo, Leah was there to visit one of her friends who was still staying at the shelter.
What's the matter?
Someone stole my sleeping bag. They won't let me stay here without my bag.
Man, that sucks. You could stay with me for a little while.
She said I could crash on her couch rather than on a street that night.
He accepts Leah's invite and is sleeping on the couch when he's confronted by Tim.
Get up! Get out now!
What?
Get out right now!
Leah said I could stay here.
I don't know who he was, but he started attacking me for no reason.
He goes on to say, the next thing I know, I got a guy trying to gouge my eyes out and pull out a clump of my hair. Well, thinking back to that crime scene, there is a clump of hair on the floor.
He almost had me on the ground, but I got control.
Alonzo wrestled in high school. So he was taught kind of let the person come into me so I can grab them and control them and take them down.
He's basically applying a chokehold. In the 70s, police would often use that technique to cause a prisoner to pass out. And he keeps doing that until he feels Timothy go limp.
That's when I heard all these other voices yelling at me to stop. I didn't mean to hurt him, I swear.
This is starting to make perfect sense to me that this is not a criminal act. This is an act of self-defense that goes too far.
Stay put, I'll be right back. So what do you think?
It's pretty much what the other two witnesses said, right? Timothy's been drinking, expresses his displeasure for all the strangers coming and going outside the apartment.
His girlfriend mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
After reviewing the case, investigators believe Timothy McClure instigated the entire incident.
Alonzo Teja is sleeping on a couch as he was invited to do. Timothy McClure, for whatever reason, alcohol, bad mood, mixture of both, decides he wants Alonzo out of this apartment.
Get out!
What?
Get out!
What's your problem, man? Leah said I could stay here.
I don't care! You're gonna go now! Get up!
Tim does not want freeloaders, I guess for the lack of a better term, sleeping on his couch and not contributing. And he's been drinking, so he's not thinking clearly.
Blind people's senses are hyperactive to compensate for the blindness. And he maneuvers Timothy so he's behind him. Alonzo puts his right arm around Timothy's neck and applies pressure. So much pressure that he's literally strangling Timothy with his forearm.
You ready to give up? Don started fights with blind men?
Of course, Timothy isn't answering him because he literally cannot breathe. But Alonzo thinks he's not answering him because he still wants to fight.
Hey, man, what the hell? Get off, man!
Alonzo, let him go!
Get off him! Let him go!
Oh my God!
Tim!
It's too late. He has restricted his air supply for too long. he has made the chokehold a fatal hold, which is why the police stopped doing it in the 70s. You can kill somebody without meaning to. That's precisely what Alonzo did.
Wake up, Tim. Tim.
Yeah, let's go arrest him. I need to place you under arrest. Would you please stand up?
We're not going to release him in his own recognizance until we determine if criminal charges are possible.
This way.
We therefore refer this case to the El Paso County Grand Jury. The grand jury focused on a legal principle known as mens rea. Mens rea, basically freely translated, means the guilty mind. To commit a crime, you must willfully and knowingly do something that's against the law.
It was determined that Alonzo was basically acting in self-defense. He did not intend to hurt or kill Tim. And that's what ultimately resulted in an acquittal of charges.
There are some crimes that begin with a motive so complicated that investigators spend years trying to understand it. Money, revenge, jealousy, fear, a secret that someone was desperate to bury. And then there are crimes for which the motive seems almost impossible to comprehend. No business dispute, no family feud, no bitter history between the victim and the attacker, no hidden enemy waiting outside the door. Just a quiet house. 2 elderly people asleep in their own bedroom. And 3 teenagers who, only hours earlier, were still living lives that most people would have described as ordinary. On the night of April 2, 1995, somewhere in the western suburbs of Montreal, Quebec, 75-year-old Frank Toupe and his 70-year-old wife, Jocelyn, went to bed expecting the next morning to look much like every other morning that had come before it. There was nothing about that night that warned them they had been noticed. Nothing that told them that somewhere outside their home, 3 boys were moving through the darkness. Nothing that told them that the danger approaching their bedroom door was not a burglar who had simply come looking for something valuable. And there was certainly nothing that could have prepared them for the fact that the people who would enter their home were teenagers. 13. 14. 15. 3 boys who were young enough to still be children in the eyes of the law, yet old enough to make a decision that would end 2 lives. Frank and Jocelyn had spent decades building a life that was almost the exact opposite of violence. Frank had served as an Anglican minister. He had spent years standing in churches, speaking to congregations, visiting people in difficult moments, and becoming the kind of man people remembered not because he demanded attention, but because he made others feel welcome. By 1995, he had been retired for several years. The frantic pace of professional life was behind him. His children were grown. The future was supposed to be quieter now. And beside him was Jocelyn, his wife and companion of many years, a woman remembered by those who knew the couple as warm and kind. They were not famous people. They were not wealthy celebrities. They were not involved in dangerous business. They were simply Frank and Jocelyn Toupe, a retired minister and his wife. 2 people who had reached an age when the greatest threats in life were supposed to be illness, loneliness, or the ordinary uncertainties of growing old. Not a baseball bat. Not a broken door. Not 3 teenagers standing inside their home in the middle of the night. The house itself offered no clue that anything extraordinary was about to happen. Outside, Beaconsfield was the kind of suburban community where houses stood behind ordinary doors and ordinary windows, where people knew the streets around them, where families went about their routines believing that home was the place where the outside world stopped. That belief would be shattered before sunrise. The first moments of the attack would be terrifyingly intimate. There would be no crowd. No witnesses. No chance for someone passing by to see what was happening. Only a bedroom. A bed. A sleeping couple. And a figure suddenly standing where no stranger should ever have been. Jocelyn woke first. Imagine opening your eyes in the darkness of your own bedroom and seeing a person you have never seen before standing beside your bed. For a fraction of a second, The mind searches for an explanation. Perhaps it is someone you know. Perhaps you are dreaming. Perhaps there has been some terrible mistake. Jocelyn asked a simple question. Who are you? The answer was not words. It was violence. A beer bottle came crashing down. Then again. And again. The room that had been silent moments earlier became a place of sudden, incomprehensible brutality. Another teenager joined the attack with a baseball bat. Jocelyn was struck repeatedly. According to the later account of one of the teenagers, she was hit 8 times. 5 of those blows to her head were ultimately fatal. Frank began to stir. He was 75 years old. He had been asleep beside his wife. And suddenly he was awake in the middle of an assault he could not possibly have anticipated. He tried to protect himself. His hands and arms were struck. His face was struck. His chest was struck. And eventually the baseball bat came down against him again and again until he collapsed. The attack did not last long. That may be one of the most disturbing facts about the case. A lifetime can take 75 years to build. A marriage can take decades. A reputation can be formed through thousands of small acts of kindness. A home can become a place filled with memories accumulated over half a century. And yet the lives of Frank and Jocelyn Toop were destroyed in minutes. When the teenagers finally left, they did not remain to see whether either victim might survive. They did not call for help. They did not stay beside the couple. They fled. And outside that house, the night continued. The streets remained quiet. Other people were asleep. Cars passed through the darkness. Somewhere, lights were still burning in other homes. And yet inside the Toop residence, something had happened that would soon shock not only Beaconsfield, but communities across Canada. The boys took the couple's car. That decision would become one of the first threads investigators could pull. The car was later abandoned in a shopping center parking lot. At first, it might have seemed like an insignificant detail. A stolen vehicle. A car left behind. Another property crime in a city where police dealt with thefts every day. But when officers checked the license plate, the name attached to the vehicle changed everything. Frank Toop. Jocelyn Toop. The officers now had a reason to go to the house. And when they arrived, they found a scene that would stay with investigators for years. The back door had been broken. The house had been disturbed. Objects had been taken. The interior showed signs of a violent intrusion. Then they reached the bedroom. Frank and Jocelyn were dead. The first theory was straightforward. Perhaps someone had broken into the house to steal. Perhaps the couple had awakened. Perhaps the burglary had gone wrong. That explanation made sense. It was terrible, but it was understandable. Criminals wanted money. They wanted valuables. They wanted a vehicle. The elderly couple had awakened and become witnesses. And the intruders had killed them to silence them. That was the kind of motive investigators could understand. But then something began to emerge that made the entire case much darker. Because the amount taken from the house was surprisingly small. And the people who had entered the home were not professional thieves. They were teenagers. 3 boys. And somewhere among the students at a nearby school, stories were beginning to spread. At first, they sounded like the kind of rumors that could be dismissed. Someone had heard something. Someone else had seen something. A teenager had said something disturbing. Then another teenager repeated it. But these were not vague stories. Some students were reportedly hearing their classmates talk about the killing. One 13-year-old reportedly boasted about his involvement. Another teenager showed off a baseball bat said to have blood on it. And one of the boys reportedly talked about wanting to know what it felt like to kill someone. That detail would transform the investigation. Because if the stories were true, then the deaths of Frank and Jocelyn Toop had not been the accidental result of a burglary gone wrong. The violence itself may have been part of the point. The robbery may have been secondary. The house may not have been chosen simply because the boys believed there was money inside. The elderly couple may have been chosen because they were vulnerable. Because they were there. Because someone wanted to know what it felt like. That possibility is difficult to comprehend. Most people spend their lives learning how to avoid causing harm. Children are taught that hurting another person is wrong. They are taught to apologize. They are taught to understand pain. They are taught that another human being's fear matters. But in this case, investigators were confronted with 3 adolescents who had crossed a boundary that, for most people, remains unthinkable. And the question was no longer simply, who killed Frank and Jocelyn Toop? The police were now facing a far more disturbing question. Why? What had happened inside the minds of 3 teenagers that allowed them to move from talking about killing someone to actually entering a stranger's home? What did they expect to feel when the first blow landed? Did they understand that Frank and Jocelyn could die? Did they care? And after they left the house, when the adrenaline began to fade and the reality of what they had done started to settle in, did they feel fear? Regret? Nothing at all? Those questions would follow the case into the courtroom. They would follow the families. They would follow the community. And, eventually, they would follow the boys themselves into adulthood. But on the morning after the murders, none of those questions had answers. There was only a house in Beaconsfield. 2 bodies inside it. A stolen car sitting abandoned elsewhere. And investigators trying to understand how such an ordinary night had ended in such extraordinary violence. The story spread quickly. A retired Anglican minister and his wife had been murdered in their own home. The victims were elderly. The attack had been savage. And the suspects, according to the emerging information, were barely more than children themselves. The news reached Canada's Parliament only days later. Politicians spoke about the murders as an example of the fear surrounding violent youth crime. The question of how Canada should punish young offenders suddenly became more than a legal discussion. It had faces. Frank's face. Jocelyn's face. And the faces of 3 boys whose names, protected by the law at the time, could not simply be placed on the front page. The community was left trying to reconcile 2 images that seemed impossible to place beside each other. On one side were Frank and Jocelyn, a couple who had spent much of their lives serving others. On the other were 3 adolescents who had entered their home after midnight and beaten them to death. The distance between those 2 worlds was enormous. Yet on that night, they had collided inside a single bedroom. And perhaps the most haunting part of the story was that Frank and Jocelyn never knew why. They never knew who had come through the door. They never knew what had brought those teenagers there. They never knew that, somewhere beyond their bedroom walls, a seemingly ordinary group of young people had been talking about something unimaginable. They simply woke up. And suddenly, their safe world was gone. For investigators, the case would soon become a race against time. The boys had talked. Schoolmates had heard them. Rumors were moving through the community. The police needed to determine what was true before the story changed with every retelling. They needed to separate gossip from evidence. They needed to find the weapon. They needed to understand who had entered the house, who had struck the victims, who had driven the stolen car, and what each boy knew. And most importantly, they needed to determine whether 3 children had really committed one of the most brutal crimes the community had ever seen. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. Because the killers had made one mistake that professional criminals often understand better than anyone. They talked. They talked at school. They talked to friends. They talked when they should have remained silent. And every time the story passed from one teenager to another, it moved closer to the police. The house had no voice. Frank and Jocelyn were gone. The bedroom could not explain what had happened. The stolen car could only point investigators toward the beginning of the trail. But the teenagers could speak. And once they did, the darkness surrounding the Toop murders began to take shape. What emerged was not the story of a robbery that had accidentally turned deadly. It was something far more disturbing. A story about 3 adolescents. A plan. A quiet suburban home. A sleeping couple. And a desire to experience something that should never have been experienced at all. On the night Frank and Jocelyn Toop went to sleep, they had every reason to believe that their front door separated them from the dangers of the outside world. By morning, that door would become part of a crime scene. And the two people who had spent their lives helping others would become the center of a national debate about violence, youth, punishment, and the frightening possibility that sometimes evil does not announce itself before entering the room. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it looks young. Sometimes it knocks on no door at all. And sometimes, before anyone realizes what is happening, it is already standing beside the bed. The first police officers who entered the Toop home could not yet know how many questions that bedroom would eventually raise. At that moment, there was only the immediate reality in front of them. Two elderly people were dead. Their deaths had occurred inside the one place where most people expect to feel safest. There was no battlefield outside the windows. No violent confrontation in the street. No warning that a dangerous person was nearby. There was only a suburban house in Beaconsfield, a community where people knew their neighbors, where evenings were usually measured by familiar routines, and where the greatest sounds after midnight were the ordinary sounds of a sleeping neighborhood. The officers moved through the house knowing that every object might matter. A door that had once been locked. A piece of furniture disturbed from its usual position. An item missing from a shelf. A footprint. A mark. A fragment of glass. A vehicle that should have been parked outside but was now somewhere else. Every detail could become a sentence in a story that had not yet been written. And somewhere in that story were three teenagers. That was the part that would make the case different from so many other murders. The investigators were not looking for a hardened criminal with years of experience. They were looking for boys. Children, at least in the eyes of many people who would later hear the story. Boys who went to school. Boys who had classmates. Boys who had parents. Boys who, only days before the murders, could have been sitting in a classroom listening to a teacher explain mathematics, history, literature, or science. Now investigators believed those same boys might have walked into an elderly couple's bedroom in the middle of the night. That contradiction would become one of the most unsettling elements of the entire case. People often imagine violent criminals as strangers who exist outside ordinary society. They imagine someone visibly dangerous. Someone older. Someone hardened. Someone who has already accumulated a history of violence. But the Toop case offered a different image. The faces were young. The hands that held the weapons belonged to teenagers. And that forced the community to confront an uncomfortable truth. Age does not automatically tell us what a person is capable of doing. A teenager can still be young enough to make childish decisions and yet old enough to understand that a baseball bat can kill. The distinction between immaturity and responsibility would become one of the central questions surrounding the case. But before the courtroom, before the arguments about punishment, before the public debate, there was the crime itself. And the crime began long before the first blow was delivered. The teenagers had apparently been talking about killing someone. That detail matters. Because there is a difference between violence that erupts in an instant and violence that begins as an idea. An impulsive act can happen in a moment of anger. A person loses control. A situation escalates. Someone says something. Someone pushes. And suddenly a tragedy occurs. But an idea is different. An idea can sit inside the mind. It can be discussed. It can be repeated. It can be joked about. It can be tested. And, if no one stops it, an idea can slowly become a plan. According to accounts that later emerged, the boys had spoken about wanting to kill someone. The words may initially have sounded unbelievable. Perhaps that was how they were able to say them. Perhaps the very extremity of the statement made it easier to dismiss. Teenagers sometimes say outrageous things. They challenge each other. They try to impress their friends. They say things they do not mean. They test the boundaries of what other people will tolerate. But there is a dangerous moment when words stop being words. The Toop murders were that moment. The boys knew where an elderly couple lived. They had access to weapons. They obtained gloves. They were thinking about fingerprints. And they eventually went to the house. The gloves are one of the details that make the story particularly disturbing. Because gloves suggest awareness. They suggest that at least some part of the group understood that what they were doing could leave evidence. A fingerprint is invisible. It can remain behind without a person realizing it. A person can touch a door handle, a piece of furniture, a window, and unknowingly leave behind a small record of their presence. The boys were apparently aware of this. They were not simply wandering blindly through the night. They were thinking about consequences. They were thinking about evidence. And yet they went anyway. That contradiction would become difficult to ignore. They understood enough to worry about fingerprints. But they did not stop. They understood enough to take precautions. But they still entered the house. They understood enough to know that killing someone was different from stealing something. But they continued forward. And once they crossed the threshold of the Toop home, the distance between fantasy and reality disappeared. Inside the house, there was no longer a conversation about killing. There were two actual human beings. Frank. Jocelyn. A husband and wife who had been together for years. A couple who had gone to sleep expecting to wake up. A couple who had no reason to believe that strangers had chosen their home. Jocelyn was the first to encounter them. Imagine the confusion of those first seconds. You wake from sleep. Your eyes are adjusting to darkness. Your mind is still trying to understand where you are. Then you see a person standing near you. There is no introduction. No explanation. No familiar face. Just a stranger inside your bedroom. The natural human response is to ask a question. Who are you? It is such a simple question. It assumes that there must be an explanation. That the person standing there must have some reason for being there. That if you speak, the situation might make sense. But there was no reasonable explanation. The answer came through violence. The attack on Jocelyn was brutal. She was struck with a beer bottle and then with a baseball bat. The blows were not symbolic. They were not meant merely to frighten her. They caused catastrophic injuries. She was struck 8 times, according to the account later described in connection with the case. 5 blows to her head were fatal. The numbers are difficult to absorb. 8 separate impacts. 5 fatal blows to the head. For the people who later examined the evidence, those numbers became part of a forensic record. For the family, they represented something else entirely. They represented suffering. They represented the final moments of a woman whose life had been filled with memories that had nothing to do with the people attacking her. And beside her was Frank. He had awakened too. Perhaps in those first seconds he did not understand what was happening. Perhaps he saw his wife being attacked before realizing that he was also in danger. Perhaps he tried to move. Perhaps he tried to protect himself. But against a baseball bat, an elderly man had little chance. Frank was attacked as well. The room that had contained the quiet routines of a married couple was transformed into a place of violence. And when the attackers finally stopped, there was nothing they could do to undo what had happened. The boys left. The house remained. The dead remained. And the night continued. That is one of the cruelest characteristics of violent crime. The world does not stop. A murder can happen in one room while life continues everywhere else. A neighbor might close a curtain without knowing what has happened next door. A driver might pass the house without noticing anything unusual. Someone might be sleeping only a short distance away. A clock keeps moving. A streetlight remains illuminated. Morning eventually arrives. And when morning came to Beaconsfield, the Toop home was no longer simply a home. It was a crime scene. The first discovery was not made because someone heard the attack. No neighbor rushed to the door. No passerby witnessed the teenagers escaping. Instead, the investigation was triggered by the stolen vehicle. The car had been taken from the Toop property and later abandoned. For the killers, leaving the vehicle behind may have seemed like the end of the journey. In reality, it became a signpost. The police checked the vehicle. The registration led them back to the tubes. And suddenly investigators had a location. A house. A couple. A possible burglary. Then the bedroom. Then the bodies. The crime had revealed itself. But its motive remained hidden. At first, the simplest explanation was a burglary. The house had been entered illegally. Property had been taken. The car had been stolen. 2 people had died. Perhaps the offenders had been surprised. Perhaps they panicked. Perhaps the murders were simply a terrible consequence of a robbery. That explanation would have been easier to accept. It would have given the community a clear picture. There were criminals. They wanted something. They entered a home. They killed when confronted. The danger, while horrifying, had a recognizable shape. But as investigators began collecting information, that explanation started to weaken. The violence seemed excessive. The victims were elderly. The suspects appeared to have had opportunities to leave without killing. And then the rumors began. At first, rumors are fragile things. They move through conversations. Someone says something. Another person repeats it. A detail changes. Another detail is added. By the time the story reaches the 5th person, it may bear little resemblance to what actually happened. Investigators know this. They cannot build a murder case from gossip alone. But they also know that rumors sometimes begin with truth. And in this case, the stories coming from teenagers were too specific to ignore. Students were reportedly talking about the murders. One boy was said to have described involvement. Another reportedly displayed a baseball bat that was said to have blood on it. There were comments about wanting to know what killing felt like. The investigators now had something far more valuable than a theory. They had a direction. They began looking at teenagers. 3 of them. 13. 14. 15. The ages alone would have been shocking. But their ages were only the beginning. The investigation began to suggest that the murder might not have been driven primarily by money. That possibility changed everything. Because if the motive was not simply theft, then the question became much darker. Why choose the Toops? Why them? Why that house? Why an elderly couple? Why enter a bedroom? Why use such extreme violence? And why would teenagers want to experience killing another human being? Those questions would not disappear when the suspects were arrested. They would follow them into the courtroom. They would become part of the public debate. They would become part of the discussion about Canada's treatment of young offenders. And they would become part of the permanent history of Frank and Jocelyn Toop. But before any sentence was handed down, before lawyers argued about responsibility, before politicians debated the future of Canada's youth justice system, investigators still had to establish exactly what had happened. They needed to determine who did what. Because 3 teenagers could not simply be treated as a single mind. Each one had a different history. Each one had a different personality. Each one had made different choices. And the question of individual responsibility would matter. Who suggested the murder? Who agreed? Who brought the weapons? Who entered the house? Who struck Jocelyn? Who struck Frank? Who drove the car? Who stood outside? Who knew what would happen? And perhaps most importantly, did all 3 understand that someone could die? The answers would emerge through interviews, statements, witnesses, and evidence. But the police already had one enormous advantage. The suspects were young. And young people talk. They talk to friends. They boast. They try to impress each other. They tell stories that they believe will make them appear stronger, braver, or more dangerous than they really are. Sometimes they lie. Sometimes they exaggerate. Sometimes they tell the truth when they have every reason not to. And in the days following the murders, words became the investigators' greatest weapon. The case was no longer simply about a broken door or a stolen car. It was becoming a psychological investigation. What did these boys believe they were doing? What did they think would happen? What did they feel afterward? And how did they explain the deaths of two people who had never done anything to them? The answers were disturbing precisely because they did not fit neatly into the familiar categories of murder. There was no obvious revenge. No long-standing feud. No desperate financial necessity that could explain the killing. Instead, the investigation pointed toward something far more unsettling: curiosity, excitement, peer influence, and the pursuit of a sensation that should have remained only a thought. The phrase thrill killing would eventually be associated with the case. But those two words could never fully explain what happened. A phrase can describe a motive. It cannot describe a life ending. It cannot describe a husband waking beside his wife and realizing that strangers have entered his bedroom. It cannot describe Jocelyn asking who the intruder was. It cannot describe the terror of those final moments. And it cannot restore the morning that Frank and Jocelyn were supposed to have. For the Toops, there would be no next day. There would be no breakfast. No conversation across the table. No ordinary afternoon. No quiet evening. Their story ended inside that bedroom. But another story was only beginning. The story of the investigation. The story of three boys. The story of a justice system struggling with an uncomfortable question. How should society respond when the people responsible for an unimaginably violent crime are themselves children? In 1995, Canada was still operating under the Young Offenders Act. The law placed strong limits on the disclosure of young offenders' identities. That meant the public knew the horror of the crime without necessarily knowing the faces behind it. For many people, this was difficult to accept. The victims were dead. The suspects were alive. The victims could never speak. The suspects had legal protections because of their age. And the gap between those realities created anger. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted to know who had done this. And they wanted to know what punishment could possibly be enough. The case would eventually reach the halls of Parliament. But long before politicians discussed it, there was another place where the consequences were already being felt. The Toop family. Because behind every headline about violent crime are people who do not experience the case as a headline. They experience it as an empty chair. A missing voice. A telephone that will never ring again. A bedroom that will never feel the same. A photograph that suddenly becomes more valuable because the person in it is no longer alive. Frank and Jocelyn were not statistics. They were not simply two victims in a criminal file. They were people who had lived 75 and 70 years before that night. They had known joy. They had known disappointment. They had built relationships. They had served their community. They had grown older together. And then strangers entered their home and took away the future they still had left. That is why the story of the Toop murders cannot begin and end with the killers. The center of the story must remain with the people whose lives were taken. The house. The bedroom. The couple. The quiet life that existed before the crime. Because the true horror of murder is not simply that someone dies. It is that an entire future disappears. Every conversation that would have happened. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every ordinary morning. Every small moment that seems insignificant while we are living it. All of it vanishes at once. And in the Toop case, that future disappeared because three teenagers wanted something they could not properly understand. They wanted excitement. They wanted to test a boundary. They wanted to know what it felt like. And for Frank and Jocelyn, the cost of that curiosity was everything. As investigators moved closer to the three suspects, the public would soon discover that the most frightening part of the case was not hidden in the walls of the Toop house. It was hidden in the conversations of teenagers. In the stories they told one another. In the objects they carried. In the choices they made before entering that house. And in the moment when a thought became an action. The police had found the beginning of the trail. Now they had to follow it. And the trail would lead directly into the world of three young people who, before that night, were still supposed to have their entire lives ahead of them. The question was what they would do with those lives after April 2, 1995. and whether the justice system would decide that the boys who had committed such an adult crime should still be treated as children. That battle was coming. But first, the investigators had to reconstruct the night. Minute by minute. Choice by choice. Blow by blow. And somewhere inside that reconstruction was the answer to the question that would haunt the case for decades. How does a teenager arrive at the moment when another human being is lying helpless in front of him, and still decide to raise the weapon one more time? For Frank and Jocelyn Toop, there would never be an answer. For everyone left behind, there would only be the search. By the time the first rumors reached the outside world, the Toop home had already become the silent center of an investigation that nobody in Beaconsfield had expected to wake up to. The police had a house. They had 2 victims. They had a stolen vehicle. They had a broken entrance. They had evidence of a violent struggle. But they did not yet have the full story. And somewhere beyond the yellow tape and police vehicles, the people who knew the suspects were beginning to understand that the truth might be much closer than anyone had imagined. It began the way many secrets begin. With a conversation. Not in a police interrogation room. Not in a courtroom. Not in a newspaper office. But among teenagers. Words passed from one person to another. A story told quietly. Then repeated. Then embellished. Then repeated again. At first, perhaps, nobody knew whether to believe it. A student had heard that someone had been involved. Another had heard that a boy was talking about the murders. Someone else had supposedly seen a baseball bat. And then there was the detail that made people stop laughing. Blood. A baseball bat allegedly shown to another teenager with what appeared to be blood on it. Suddenly, the rumors did not sound like teenage bravado anymore. They sounded like evidence. For the police, this was the moment when the case began to change direction. The investigation had started with a dead couple and the assumption of a burglary. Now the detectives were looking at a group of young people who might have known far more about the murders than they should. The first task was to identify which parts of the stories were true. Teenagers can invent things. They can exaggerate. They can claim responsibility for events they had nothing to do with. They can tell shocking stories simply to make themselves seem important. So investigators had to be careful. A statement from one student could be dismissed. 2 independent statements could be interesting. 3 pieces of information pointing toward the same group could become something else entirely. The detectives began putting the fragments together. Names emerged. Then more names. Eventually, the trail narrowed toward 3 boys. 13. 14. 15. 3 ages that seemed almost impossible beside the crime they were suspected of committing. For many people, the word teenager automatically creates an image of vulnerability. Someone still growing. Someone still learning. Someone who has not yet developed the judgment of an adult. But the police were not investigating a schoolyard fight. They were investigating the deaths of 2 elderly people. The investigators needed to look beyond the ages. They needed to understand the choices. And as more information surfaced, the outline of the night became clearer. The boys had apparently been drinking. There were reports of alcohol and drug use. There were discussions about killing. There were preparations. There were gloves. There were weapons. And there was a destination. The Toop home. That sequence mattered. Because it suggested that the murders were not simply the result of a sudden confrontation. The violence had a beginning before the boys reached the house. The decision was already forming. The thought existed before the weapon was raised. The intention existed before the door was opened. That is what makes premeditated violence so difficult to understand. The human mind is capable of stopping itself many times before an action becomes irreversible. A person can walk away. A person can change their mind. A person can tell a friend that an idea has gone too far. A person can put down a weapon. A person can turn around and leave. There are countless exits from a bad decision. The boys passed them. One after another. Until there was only one path left. Forward. Toward the house. Toward the bedroom. Toward Frank and Jocelyn. And perhaps that is why the question of motive became so important. If the purpose had simply been money, investigators could understand the basic calculation. Enter. Steal. Escape. But if killing was itself part of the attraction, then the calculation was completely different. The victims were not obstacles. Their vulnerability may have been part of the appeal. That possibility would make the Toop murders especially disturbing to the public. People can understand greed even when they hate it. They can understand revenge even when they condemn it. They can understand fear. But the desire to experience killing is harder to place inside an ordinary human framework. It forces people to confront something they would rather not believe. That violence can sometimes be sought for its own sake. And when the people seeking it are teenagers, the question becomes even more disturbing. Where did the idea come from?